morning again, and welcome back to the YPO Davos app. It's a pleasure first for me to introduce you to my friend Melwin from YPO Hong Kong, also YPO Yangon, CEO of the Yoma Group, an inspiration and a mentor for me in Myanmar, as I also do business in Myanmar, and he's kindly, of course, accepted to moderate the panel as a YPO Hong Kong member here. Thank you so much. The floor is yours, Melwin.
Thank you, Pascal. Well, Carrie, thank you very much for coming. I know you have a very busy schedule. This is your third Davos, but probably a more memorable Davos. I want to start by something that is more quite serious. I think Hong Kong, we have a limited time, so Hong Kong is really under attack. In particular, the core of Hong Kong, which is the one country, two system, which to us have worked very well over the last 20-odd years. But it seems that in the last year, the cracks are appearing. What is the future for this system, and how do we strengthen it?
Thank you very much. First of all, very grateful to YPO for inviting me to share a few thoughts with you at this YPO hub. I have been a strong supporter of YPO within the government, so in my previous positions, whenever YPO asked, I'm happy to host an event for YPO in Hong Kong. So I hope there's a future occasion that either at Davos and in Hong Kong, we could have that sort of interactions. Yes, Hong Kong has gone through a very difficult 7 months. And all the more reason why, after a bit of struggling, I decided to come to this WEF so that I have a first-hand opportunity to explain the Hong Kong situation, to clarify any misperceptions about the situation, to answer your question. So Melvin asked a very pertinent question about this very, very important principle of one country, two systems. Hong Kong is a part of the People's Republic of China. That is beyond doubt. And that is written into the Basic Law, Article number 1, that Hong Kong is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. But to solve this historical legacy, because previously in 1997, we were a British colony, there was this innovative, I would talk about innovation, a very innovative design of the principle of one country, two systems. So how could one allow within the same country two systems? Socialist system in the mainland and a capitalist system in Hong Kong. We have our own legal system, the common law system, whereas in the mainland have their own system. We have all the rights and freedoms, which we treasure a lot, which are also enshrined in the Basic Law. We have our own currency, we have free flow of capital, and so on. So the very important thing is not to allow this very important principle to be shaken. Despite the protests and sometimes a very worrying trend of escalating violence and political demands from the protesters, I have made it very clear, though without some difficulties, that I have to stand firm on some of these important principles, that no concessions could be given if those concessions meant that it will erode this important principle, one country, two systems. Equally important will be preservation of the rights and freedoms enshrined under the Basic Law. Equally important will be upholding the rule of law in Hong Kong. That means the independence of the judiciary and fair trials and access to legal justice and so on. And finally, it's also important to preserve what I describe as institutional strengths in Hong Kong. And there are many of these strengths, ranging from the court system to the law enforcement system, including the police, which unfortunately has been misrepresented and under a lot of attack recently. And also the freedom of the media being operating in Hong Kong. So how much of that protest arose from trying to attack this one country, two systems? I don't think it represents a majority view. I think the majority of Hong Kong people still want to enjoy all the rights and freedoms under one country, two systems. But at the same time, there is a tiny minority of the population who, despite Hong Kong being returned and reunified with the mainland of China for over 22 years, have not developed that sort of national identity. association with the mainland of China. So there have been advocacy and talks about Hong Kong independence. Hong Kong people could decide her own future through referendum and maybe other things. And those were, I'm afraid, not permissible under the one country, two systems.
So the theme of this year's Davos is stakeholder capitalism. And in some way that resonates with me because I think the one country, two system in Hong Kong and the thriving of Hong Kong has been great. But in many ways, many people have been left behind. And the social issues underneath underlying the society seems to be causing the initial protests. So in the theme of stakeholder capitalism, how do you think the one country, two system can be strengthened to allow a broader base wealth distribution?
Well, to answer your question, Melvin, maybe I can give a bit of my own background. I spent my whole working life in the government doing various positions, particularly positions which gave me that privilege of serving the disadvantaged. So I was Hong Kong's Director of Social Welfare, especially during the SARS period. I was a chairperson of a commission on poverty. I have devised the first official poverty line in Hong Kong so that we could evaluate the poverty situation and the effectiveness of government intervention. I'm sure you know the Gini coefficient in Hong Kong is extremely high. It's over 0.5%. But after the government intervention, we managed to help 350,000 people out of poverty, even under that relative concept of poverty. So it's not an absolute poverty of $10 per day type of poverty definition. So I, since taking office, whenever I go out to speak, even at Davos in 2018, at APAC 2018, I talk about inclusive capitalism. So if Hong Kong continues to be a capitalist economy, which is the best arrangement because we don't have any resources, we have to be open, competitive, and a free economy, then we have to pay more attention to inclusiveness. That is addressing your point that we have to make people feel, the majority of people feel, that they are sharing the benefits of economic growth. It's actually quite sad if people care to look into the wage statistics. Until we introduced a statutory minimum wage about 5 or 6 years ago, the low-end wages of dishwashers, maybe security staff, cleansing workers, have not moved at all during a very long period, partly because of Asian financial crisis, partly also because of there is no government intervention to make sure that the non-skilled and the sort of grassroots workers could enjoy a better deal. So this is what I call, if the government is serious about more inclusiveness, then in terms of policies, in terms of resources committed to helping the disadvantaged, there's a lot of things we could do. If I can also give you this figure, since taking office in 2017, July, within 2 years period, we have increased welfare expenditure, whether providing direct services for the elderly and the handicapped, or in terms of social security cash payments, the welfare budget has grown by 29%. And now is totaling 84 billion Hong Kong dollars. So we will continue to move in that direction. But of course, if you ask me, I still feel that Chinese people have that virtue of self-reliant. They don't want to get dough from the government, they want to work. So opportunities are equally important other than doing more in social security.
So can I ask about the government intervention, which is a word that you use? Hong Kong has been known to be the freest, one of the freest economies in the world. And this morning there was a session that was very interesting about stakeholder capitalism, about the need for the government to play a much more active role, because left on its own device, I think it's very hard for corporates to make the case that in the short term, they need to make certain sacrifices for the longer term good. So what's your view on what Hong Kong government can do to encourage this inclusive capitalism?
When I ran my campaign in contesting for the chief executive position, I included in my manifesto exactly a response to the question Melvin asked. What should be the role of the government, because Hong Kong has always been very proud of non-intervention, laissez-faire, and so on and so on. I took the view, partly because of my own background and my own philosophy, that the government should be more proactive because of globalization, the need to maintain Hong Kong's competitiveness. So I said that apart from playing the role of being a public service provider, apart from playing the role of a regulator in the markets, we should embrace two additional roles. One is to be a facilitator. The other is to be a promoter. So facilitation by government means a lot of more G2G work, entering into free trade agreements, investment agreements, comprehensive agreements on avoidance of double taxation, which we did pretty well. In the last 2 years, we signed 4 FTAs, totaling now 8. So half of the FTAs after 1997 were signed in the last 2 years. 2 important ones, one with the 10 member nations of ASEAN, the other with Australia. So we want to sign one with UK after they achieve Brexit later this month. Second facilitation is really to leverage on Hong Kong's global connectivity to make our presence felt and our voice heard. Like coming to Davos and opening more overseas offices. Hong Kong now has a network of 13, what we call economic and trade offices around the world. The one closest to Davos will be the Berlin office. And we opened an office in Thailand, Bangkok last year. The third is, of course, to help industries. We don't pick winners or losers or companies. We practice level playing field, but we could facilitate a sector development. So tax is a very important, a very useful measure to promote sectoral development. In the last 2 years, the Hong Kong SAR government has introduced at least 5 or 6 tax measures, being tax incentives. So, for example, small and medium enterprises now don't pay the 16.5% profits tax; they pay 8.25, which is really very low. Tech companies who want to invest more in R&D, they get a 300% tax deductible for their expenditure. The first 2 million and anything above 2 million will be 200%. Captive insurance and reinsurance get profits tax exemption. Aircraft leasing gets profits tax exemption. And we are doing one on maritime insurance and specialty risk. We will give them tax exemption so that Hong Kong will become more attractive as a place to grow these businesses. And so these are some of the facilitation measures that I would not regard as intervention. I think those are justified to maintain Hong Kong's competitiveness.
Well, that's very good to hear, because Hong Kong is very much a financial hub. And more diversified industries would be healthy for Hong Kong. But can I just go into this point about Hong Kong being the gateway to China? I think it's hard to debate this point that over not just the last 22 years, but way before that, Hong Kong being the entrance or the gateway to China, which is a very large economy, that served us very well. But in the last 10 years, 20 years, we've seen Shenzhen really come up in terms of size of the GDP is now larger than Hong Kong. In terms of the tech development, is probably world class, best in the world. But also Shanghai has also come up. So what is Hong Kong's future role if other cities are going to be less reliant on Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong's role and Hong Kong's direction should be, I feel, looking for complementarity with these emerging mainland economies. So there's no point to go into very fierce direct competition. For example, on the port business, Hong Kong used to be the world's #1 port in terms of TEUs, container boxes. Last year, we dropped to #8. So we were overtaken by, well, it's gradual. It's not suddenly from 1 to 8. It's over the last 20 years. We gradually dropped from the first place to the 8th place, overtaken by Shanghai, Ningbo, Zhoushan, Qingdao, and so on. So there's no point to sort of expand the port to compete for the port business, because after all, we are a small government. We will not be able to offer direct subsidies. So the direction is to look for complementarity, which means that we do the things that we are good at. Maritime insurance, ship leasing, financial services, And those are the things that we are good at. So we sell these services to Shenzhen Port, to Qingdao Port, so that we could complement each other. And this is where this Greater Bay Area comes into place. I'm sure some of you may have heard about this Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, a region of 71 million population, a GDP bigger than Australia, 1.6 trillion US dollars, and huge potential for growth because of the emerging middle-class population. There will be huge demand for high-quality services, and that would be, in my view, a direction for Hong Kong, especially for Hong Kong young people, to seize those opportunities.
So I'm going to ask a couple of more questions, and then I'll open up to the floor. But going on to this Greater Bay, I remember you were here last year as well, and we had a very good session on Greater Bay. That's such an important project, but yet I think in Hong Kong, the young people who are expected to benefit from this have been viewing this as a further integration into China and actually resisting it. I think it goes back to the trust that Hong Kong, particularly the younger generation, have on mainland China and the policies. And this morning we had an interesting session on the trust barometer, and there's a very interesting finding that China has been ranked #1. Hong Kong has been dropping because of the protest, but there's a huge divergence of view that domestically there's very strong nationalism in China, trusting the Chinese government in terms of leading society change, whereas outside we don't seem to have that. What can the government do, and what will the Hong Kong, how will Hong Kong navigate this?
Well, it's actually a pity that a sizable portion of Hong Kong young people do not have that sort of association with their own country. It's actually very sad whenever I see during the protests with young people waving American flags, British flags, or even defacing the national flag. These are really acts which are very, very unacceptable, to put it that way. But the way forward is, of course, basically will be education. How we could instill a stronger sense of national identity amongst our young people. How we can help our young people to have a better understanding of the constitutional relationship between Hong Kong and the mainland of China. And also to provide more opportunities for young people to go to see the latest developments in the mainland China. I have to tell you that in my interactions with some of these more radical young people, many of them have not crossed the border to visit Shenzhen. To them, Shenzhen, well, could be still a very primitive place, when in fact, if they went there, they would say that electronic payments and all these things are even more advanced than in Hong Kong. But having said that, I would say that it's not all young people. If you go into Shenzhen or the Greater Bay Area, together with Guangdong, we have developed a large number of youth entrepreneurial bases. I'm sure YPO should tap these young entrepreneurial bases. They are co-working spaces for young people from Hong Kong and mainland China to work together. And many often they also provided with affordable accommodation, whether in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, and so on. So through more interactions and understanding each other, I hope the situation will improve. Yeah.
I think that's going to be very important. When I'm going to ask my last question, which is the most difficult question.
For you or for me?
For you, I think. So the protest has really been, of course, wearing on everyone's mind, and it's really saddens all of us. But I think in particular, one of the biggest issue is 7 months ago, there would be an argument that this is a minority movement, that some people are unhappy and that's why they go on the street. Now, whether you believe it's a 1 million, 2 million or 500,000 people, it's gone on for 7 months. There's still a lot of people on the street. It is a large movement and it represents a large part of Hong Kong. How are we going to address that? Protest radicals aside, how are we going to have a sizable change in perception of a large part of the population to put people back together?
That is indeed a very difficult issue. I wouldn't deny that these protests have gone on for so long, and during the process, there have been all sorts of political demands which the government was seen as not able to respond. But at the same time, there were a lot of misrepresentation, misinformation on the social media, especially targeting the police. So this anger amongst a significant portion of people has yet to be vented. How to release that anger? If you ask me that for political expediency, I could just pick one or two political demands and concede on those demands. But I shouldn't do that because of the very important principles that I've just mentioned, and also for long-term Hong Kong interest. The other thing is to go into a very sincere and intensive dialogues with the people, which we are doing. We are doing with different sectors, different age groups, including going into schools and so on. The third is let's have some rational debate. Let's provide a platform for some rational discussion and debate on the problems that have caused this anger and the way forward. So we have committed to setting up an independent review committee led by a distinguished community leader to understand better the deep-seated fundamental issues. But I'm not particularly optimistic that in a very short period of time that we could satisfactorily resolve this.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to questions. Can we start at the back? Yeah. I think it's 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Hi, Islam, thank you for coming and speaking to us. I lived in Hong Kong for 12 years from 97, 2009. I used to travel there, so very interested in this. I asked the question, given the experience of the Section 23, Article 23 legislation in 2003, was this worth it? Was this legislation around extradition to the mainland worth stirring up? It should have been fairly obvious, some of the protests that would occur, and it does. I don't understand why that legislation was important enough to lead to this kind of destabilization.
Well, it's always easy to discuss this issue with the so-called benefit of hindsight. I did say in one of the interviews that if given a chance and with a crystal ball in front of me that doing this will lead to this, I certainly won't do it. But to give you a detailed exposition of why we did it and how we did it, we need half an hour. But in short, this is not something that is extraordinary. It has been exaggerated and misrepresented. For example, I still read statements coming out from the U.S. Congress, reports saying that under the extradition bill, the chief executive herself could at will surrender fugitive offenders back to mainland for trial. And of course, it's an unjust trial in that description. But that was not the content in the bill. The bill was amendments to an existing regime which has gone on for over 20 years and very acceptable to many jurisdictions. And it does require that any application for surrender has to go through the courts, and Hong Kong courts are truly independent before the chief executive could sign on a certificate for surrender. But you are right. Actually, if one rationally look back, we have never succeeded on any occasion when it comes to very sensitive Hong Kong mainland relationship. The 2003 Article 23 issue, the introduction of national education into schools in 2012, the universal suffrage debate in 2014 and 15, resulting in Occupy Central, and the current saga. Yeah. But of course, before the current saga, things looked pretty good and rational. I have to tell you that I was monitoring the turnout of the protests for the last 2 years before we did this, and we thought that, maybe we have a relative calm period, that we could do something to improve Hong Kong's legal regime in working with other jurisdictions, not just mainland, but other jurisdictions where we did not have an extradition agreement, that we could contribute to this international combating of international crime. So things looked pretty calm and rational and good, and my popularity rate was quite high just before June 2019, because there are things you have to do. Yeah. If you ask me, Article 23, you have to do it sooner or later because it's about national security and protection of sovereignty. which country will allow other elements to come in and undertake subversive cessation activities at will? This is endangering not only the country, but also the inhabitants in the country. So my short response to you is I have accepted full responsibility for this misjudgment and for this lack of sensitivity about the more ingrained sentiments. But you have also to understand that we are facing a very well-organized campaign and propaganda over this. That is no doubt about that by now. So on a relative basis, we lost, and we have to accept the consequences of political failure. But there was absolutely no ill intent to cause this problem in Hong Kong, both at the government level or at the personal level.
Thank you.
Ms. Lam, thank you so much for coming. I actually live in Hong Kong. I am part of one of the new virtual banks that were created. My name is Max. And I want to actually say two things. One is, from Hong Kong Monetary Authority's decision to issue these 8 new licenses, I think Hong Kong actually has taken a strong leadership position in this space. Singapore is issuing a new license this year. We're going to see a cascade in Southeast Asia. And I think that in this vein, Hong Kong actually is proactively moving forward to do more inclusive finance. And that's a story that's not necessarily told very widely. The second is about the protest. So I used to live in the United States. And to date, for all of the media coverage, there has been very few actual severe casualties. Where I used to live in Chicago, we had thousands of people die every year because of indiscriminate gun violence. And I think that narrative also is not necessarily captured at state. So I want to go back to the heart of what you just addressed, which is how do we actually increase the economic opportunity available to the young people so they feel that they're inclusive, right, into the future growth of Hong Kong? I feel if we can find that answer, then all of these other issues will naturally evolve into place. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for pointing out that leadership of the government in sort of virtual banking and the application of technology. This is something that to me is very inspiring and encouraging because we discuss about the role of the government. Once the government decided to do something and put in place those measures, the market response is tremendous. And this is the strength of Hong Kong. These market practitioners do not need the government to tell them or to subsidize them. You just give us the conducive environment and the facilitating measures. We will react, and we react very fast. So I'm very encouraged by that. Similarly, we introduced in 2018 the faster payment system. And now we are the world's number 3 after mainland and Thailand in terms of the penetration of using electronic transactions and so on. So economic diversity has been a policy priority in the last few years. In fact, dating back to Asian financial crisis and financial tsunami, there were always attempts by government to diversify into technology, creative industries, certification testing, environmental services, and so on. But those efforts, I have to admit, were not sustained. Whenever the economy started to boost again, we forgot about all these things and concentrate on financial services and tourism and so on. But at least for my government, we are very determined on 2 areas. One is technology. Having invested over $13 billion in a 2-year period, committed to building new infrastructure at the Lok Ma Chau loop, and also providing more R&D funding for universities, have more talents like yourself coming to work in Hong Kong. The other is creative industry, especially in design and arts and culture. We have a wonderful project called the West Kowloon Cultural District emerging. And these 2 areas will provide more opportunities for young people because young people's talents are really diversified. Not everyone should go into financial or banking. So with these added opportunities, and I hope in time to come, the recognition of the Greater Bay Area potential, then young people in Hong Kong will really have more opportunities.
Thank you, Carrie. I don't think we have time for the last question, Pascal. We can ask afterwards.
That's all right.
But on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for coming. I think however way you look at it, I know you have a very tough job. I also know that you have a reputation for extremely hardworking ethics. So I wish you well, and I also hope that through Davos or other forums, we can have the opportunity to really tell the Hong Kong story. I think from today, it's very clear that Hong Kong has a great future ahead as part of China, and the economy is being diversified. And I hope all of you would have a chance to look at investing here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.